Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be diving into the new Nars Summer Collection. So they launched a new eyeshadow palette. They also launched a blush and bronzer duo in 3 different color combinations. Lots to talk about in this video. So let's just get into it. We're gonna first start with the eyeshadow palette. This retails for $59. You can pick it up at Ulta and you can also pick it up on the Nars website. It is a limited edition palette featuring 16 matte, shimmer, and glitter finishes. In the video, I create 2 eyeshadow looks using the palette. I have used it off camera, but I filmed 2 looks using the palette. It is more of a warm, bronzy type of palette, so lots to say about this. Of course, I will be swatching the palette and then also comparing it to a bunch of other palettes so you can kind of get an idea if this is a palette that you guys need to run out and grab. Then we have the Nars Summer Unrated Blush and Bronzer Duo. Now this bronzer and blush duo retails for $45 and it comes in 3 different color combinations. I actually chose the middle one, which is Orgasm X and Casino. The lightest one that they have is the Orgasm with the Laguna bronzer. The darkest one that they have is Dominant and Cypress. Those are the 3 bronzer and cheek duos that came in this collection. These are not new shades to Nars. I wish they'd come out with more shades of bronzers and blushes. I just feel like they're kind of doing the same thing over and over. It's just different packaging. So I don't know, you guys, but that's just my thoughts on it right away. But I did decide to pick this up because I did not have the Orgasm X blush. And I've always really liked the Orgasm blush, but I felt like it was a little bit too light sometimes. So I thought the Orgasm X might be perfect. So when I saw this, I thought it kind of made me pull the trigger and just go ahead and buy it. So that's what we're doing today, you guys. It's all about Nars. Let's go ahead and dive into the applications and tutorials of all these products. Then we will get into the swatches and comparisons. And then of course, I will get into my final thoughts. So I will see you guys then. This palette is different in person than it looked in the images. I feel like this palette needs one more cool tone brown, dark brown shade. So I'm gonna grab my Smith 253 brush. I'm gonna go on with it dry first. I don't have any concealer on, so if I get some fallout, that's fine. And I'm gonna go into the shade right here. Even though I didn't dampen the brush, it is applying really easily. I'm not getting any fallout. Now I am kind of going slow and I'm kind of taking like small little stippling strokes, but that shade is really pretty. Now let's dampen the brush and see how it intensifies. And go right over top of it. So obviously using the setting spray kind of makes it more of like a foiled effect. It really brings that that really pretty shine. So I'm gonna grab the BK Beauty Angie Hot and Flashy A504. So this is Angie from Hot and Flashy, that's her channel's name. And this is the brush collection that she created with BK Beauty. So I'm gonna grab this shade. That color has some pigment. That's the color of it. So it looks light in the pan, but it actually has a depth to it. You can see I'm able to build that shade quite a bit, way more than I was personally expecting to. So that is a good sign. So I'm taking the Unit 202 brush. Okay, I'm gonna wipe off my blending brush and I'm gonna go into this mauve shade right here. It's kind of a pinky mauve. And I'm just gonna bring a little bit of color over top of that. Now I'm gonna go into this color right here. And I'm just gonna slowly kind of build that dimension. And I'm gonna bring it like right here. Okay, I'm gonna leave that there for just a minute. I have some blending I gotta do, but I'm gonna go back into that purple shadow and I'm gonna bring that over just to kind of blend it into those shadows. Okay, so I went ahead and threw on some concealer and I'm now going to work on the lower lash line and then pull it all together and kind of buff out these harsh lines on the outer corner. So I'm gonna first grab this shade right here, which I am very impressed that this shade has some pigment. I was not really expecting that shade to have any pigment. You're able to build it, especially on a medium complexion. So for those who even have a lighter complexion, you're going to be able to use that as a transition shade, which is really quite interesting because it looks so light in the pan. Now I'm going to take the Sigma smudge brush. This is the E21, and I'm going to go into this shade right here. I'm going to smudge that into the outer corner. I'm also going to do that on the upper lash line just to add some of that extra dimension and depth. I'm going to go back into that mauve shade and kind of blend out that dark. You guys know how I love to do an eyelid pop. Like I love to put on a shade right on the center of the lid. So I'm going to take that Smith 253 brush and I want to go into the shade right here. And I want to put that like right here on the center of the lid just to make that pop. And then kind of blend it out. That's a pretty color. Let's see what that would look like on the brow bone highlight. I'm going to take a tiny brush and it's a little chunky of a shimmer and I would just do small little and then like blend it out with your finger because it's quite chunky. Okay, so this is the final look for look number 1. The lipstick and lip liner that I paired it with is the Victoria Beckham number 4 lip liner, this is one of my favorite lip liners. And then I paired it with Dance Floor Princess, I think is what it's called. Yeah, from Charlotte Tilbury. It's such a perfect pink. Like, this is one of my favorite pink shades. It's got a perfect undertone and it's just beautiful. And I thought it would go really pretty with this look. I will say though, when I went off camera and did the other eye, that dark gray was a mess. I don't know if it was the way that I was jabbing it on, but I had a fallout mess that I had to clean up, which was okay because I didn't have concealer on yet, but I did have some fallout with that shade, which I didn't experience that on this eye, so I wanted to mention it. So that's it for look number 1. Let's go ahead and jump into look number 2. Let's go ahead and dive into the next look with this palette. There's a shade in here I'm a little bit concerned about. There's this shade right here, this orange shade that just doesn't feel like it's going to give me much. It's okay, but it doesn't have a lot to it. So I want to see how that shade's going to work because the other shades I feel like are just normal shimmers, right? Like that's what they are. But that shade in particular feels a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with that shade. I'm going to put it all over the lid and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the shade. Let's see what it looks like. It's actually got quite a bit of pigment. It looks a lot better on than it looks in the pan, to be honest with you. I can say that color in particular would be gorgeous on a darker complexion. That shade would be so pretty on a darker, like a dark, deep complexion. It would really make that shade pop. It's prettier than I was expecting it to be. It is. So I'm gonna dip into this shade right here. Now I'm gonna go into this shade right here, and I'm gonna bring that on the inner corner and the outer corner. And also kind of connect them in the middle. Kind of buff out those edges. to take the brush. I'm going to go into the gold. Let's go ahead and go on to the lower lash line. I don't know, I'm just thinking outside the box, but I'm wondering how this shade would look on the lower lash line. This like olive green, which is kind of brown. I think what I'm gonna first do is I'm gonna go into this first shade right here. I'm gonna bring it on the lower lash line. I'm just gonna try it. I mean, why not? It's just makeup. So I'm gonna go into that shade, and I'm gonna put it on the I'm gonna put it here on the outer corner and see. That's actually quite pretty. That shimmer shadow on the lower lash line is very pretty. It just looks just a little bit kind of soft, and it does give you that summery look because it's shimmer. I like that. So I'm gonna go in one more time with that. Just make it a little bit more impactful. Oh, yes. Let's put that on the outer corner. And the inner corner over top of that brown. It's actually really pretty, you guys. So I just dipped my brush, the smallest tiny amount. I grabbed a tiny bit of that and stuck it right there on the center just to make that kind of pop. And then I'm gonna grab the gold and kind of blend it out with the gold. I'm gonna go ahead and go off camera, do the other eye, put some mascara on. When I come back, we're gonna dive into this blush and bronzer palette one more time because the last time I used it, it didn't quite work out. So I'm gonna go off camera and I will be right back. Eye makeup's done. Let's move on to the blush and bronzer duo. Now, the last time I tried to use this bronzer, the foundation that I was wearing and testing, which by the way was the Tarasbeamer Yummy Skin foundation, this one kind of has a dry oil texture and it kind of sets on top of the skin. And my face was red because I had just had a chemical peel. So when I went in with the bronzer, I kept looking at my skin and I'm like, why is it so red? Why is this bronzer so red? Well, it took me a minute, but I realized that it wasn't the bronzer. It was actually the foundation was lifting from my face, and as I tried to blend it in, I was removing the foundation. The redness was actually my skin because my skin was red after my chemical peel. So let's try this again. Right now I'm wearing a foundation that's pretty set down. So let's try it. I am going to take the Nishi Pro from Sonia G, and I'm going to go into the bronzer. I'm going to try a different brush on the other side for the bronzer. I don't know if it's this brush, but I'm not really getting it to blend very good. But before I go in with the bronzer on this side, I actually wanted to put the blush on so that you could see the blush without the bronzer. Okay, so let's go into this blush. The blush is really pretty. It's a beautiful blush. So this one is the Orgasm X. And it's pretty. It's pink. It really doesn't go with this bronzy makeup look, but it is really a pretty color. I'm going to go into the bronzer and put it on this side. Okay, so I went ahead and powdered. Let me just say this. I like the blush in this palette, the Orgasm X. It's a gorgeous shade. It's super pigmented. So you have to go in with the lightest touch. And even with that, tap your brush off and make sure that you're not applying too much because a little bit of it does go a really long way. However, with that said, it blends beautifully. A lot of the times you'll have a blush that's super, super pigmented. And then once you put it on, you have to work so hard to get that pigment to blend. Not with this blush. This blush blends beautifully, applies beautifully. Now, I was able to kind of soften it up a little bit because I did put some setting powder on. and kind of softened everything up. But overall, I love the shade of that blush. Oh, it's so pretty. I can see why people buy it. Now, with that said, Casino, the bronzer color in this, Casino has just never been my favorite shade of bronzer. And I wish that they would kind of come out with something different. I really do. But even though I love the way that this shade swatches, so when I swatch it, I'm like, gosh, that's a beautiful bronzy shade. But when I put it on, it just is not that flattering on the skin. And I'm not the biggest fan of that bronzer. So that's it for the tutorials. Let's go ahead and jump into the swatches, and then we will get into my final thoughts. So I will see you guys then. Okay, so now that we've made it through the swatches, let me go ahead and get into my final thoughts. I like this palette, but this is not a necessary palette, you guys. I feel like Nars is duping themselves over and over and over and over. And I remember when I posted this in my community center, many of you guys expressed that. It was almost like we all kind of got that impression of like, really? That's what you're giving us, Nars? It's the same thing over and over and over, just in different packaging. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind this palette. There are some things that I wish were a little different, which I'll get into in a minute. But it's just the same thing over and over and over, and I'm just kind of over it. How hard is it to create new blush shades and new bronzer shades? It's not that difficult. I just don't understand why they keep repeating the same shades over and over when it comes to the blush and the bronzers. Now we got the same shades over and over in the palettes. Now this palette has been discontinued, but in my opinion, this is one of the best Nars palettes ever made in history. For many reasons, I love this palette on every level, and it's been a staple in my collection since I bought it, and it will remain a staple in my collection. It's one of those absolute dependable palettes, beautiful pigments, blend beautifully, and this shade right here is one of my favorite shades ever. It's a gorgeous peachy color. And I love the texture of these, and it's just a beautiful palette. So I keep thinking, well, if you're going to keep duping yourself, then dupe the Skin Deep, because that one was your bestseller. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say, please bring back the Skin Deep palette. The Skin Deep palette is so amazing. Or even bring like Skin Deep 2 or something, right? I will say though, this palette I recently bought, and I'm obsessed with it. This is another amazing Nars palette. So this is the Climax palette. I think they launched this last summer sometime, and then it went out of stock, and it came back in just recently, and I went ahead and picked it up. So happy that I did, because I love this palette. This is what Nars really is. All of the pigments in this palette is perfection. The tones are beautiful. I love that cool tone moment. Gorgeous palette. And I'll be honest with you, I also really liked this one. So this is the Uninhibited palette. This is a great palette. Love this. The other thing I want to mention is there's a particular formula from Nars that I'm personally obsessed with. It's in the Skin Deep palette, that shade that I just talked about. So all of these shades are like that. So all of the shimmers in the Skin Deep, and it's not in every palette, but it is in the Skin Deep. And it's also in this one, which is the Uninhibited palette. All three of these shades right here are in that formula. So I'm gonna swatch this shade right here. It has this gorgeous shine to it without being that chunky glitter, chunky shimmer. It's not a chunky, it's a very thin, beautiful formula that sparkles. And even this palette, which is the Summer Solstice from last year, so this palette's filled with that formula. So you have like this shade right here, you have this shade right here. Look how beautiful those are. So they have these like finely milled glitter particles in there that gives that shine without the chunky shimmer on the lid. So for those of you out there who don't really like that thick, chunky shimmer, for example, some of those chunky shimmers that you get in like Pat McGrath or Natasha Denona, if those are not your jam, this is a great formula for those that still likes that sparkle without that real thick chunky shimmer. So the reason why I bring up that formula is because there's a lot of their palettes that has that, but this new one doesn't have any of that formula. So if you're familiar with NARS and that's a formula that you love, like I do, this new palette doesn't have it. It's a thicker formula and it's got more of an impact. So, and I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing. I like that formula as well. So if you like that formula, you know, you might not like this palette because I personally love that formula. And that formula is what makes me reach for a NARS palette. When I want something on the lid that gives that sparkle and gives that pearlescent look without being a super chunky shimmer, that's when I reach for the NARS palettes because that texture is just stunning and it's one of my favorite formulas. And it's also one of my favorite formulas from NARS. Now, don't get me wrong, this palette is really pretty. Yeah, I couldn't really find anything wrong with it. I've used it now on camera twice, and I think I used it 1 or 2 times off camera, just kind of playing around and throwing a little bit of makeup on, you know, when I wasn't filming or whatever. And it's a fine palette. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but I feel like it's missing that texture. It's missing that pearlescence formula that I just love so much from NARS. That's just how I feel. So those are my overall thoughts. Sound off down below in the comment section. Let us know, have you guys picked this palette up? How are you feeling about it? Did you not pick it up? Let us know why you decided to skip it. I'm so curious to hear your guys' thoughts. So let's just have a conversation. Sound off down below in the comment section. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in today's video. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys all in my next video. Love you. Bye.